was two.
Yeah.
There. It's okay. We thought it was two for a minute, but we're all good.
Now the glass is even bigger.
I know. I don't know if I can handle it. All right. So yesterday, well, not yesterday, but 2 days ago, we were really going into the whole the era of the United States had changed. Right. It was more of a common, what they call a common man era, which basically means that instead of being based on aristocrats and those that were highly educated, rich, it was more based on like common individuals like farmers and just merchants having more power than ever before. And obviously it leads up until the election of 1824, where you now have a new type of system where people can nominate candidates. And with this happening, you saw a change of four new candidates really breaking the scene. Now, some of them, like Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, were lifelong politicians. We talked about Henry Clay a bunch of times before. He was a great compromiser and everything. He was famous for making deals. John Quincy Adams' father was John Adams. He's been a lifelong, aristocrat, very smart, a lawyer. And then you see like new types of candidates like Andrew Jackson, who was a common man, for the most part, and he ended up making something of himself, a war hero, all that stuff. He ends up, obviously, when you look at the election, the electoral vote is kind of divided amongst all four of them. And the way that it used to work back during this time is that you need to have at least a majority of the entirety of the vote, not like of the four candidates. If you add up all the points together, you need to have at least a majority of that. And no one did have that. So they had to go to the special selection, which is going to the House of Representatives. So obviously we know what happens is the corrupt bargain occurs. Well, Henry Clay gets eliminated. We talked about that. He gets taken out because he's fourth place. So he goes back to being the Speaker of the House. Obviously, he doesn't really like Andrew Jackson because he doesn't really believe in the same ideals as him. So he ends up making a deal with John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams becomes the president and selects Henry Clay as his Secretary of State, right? This was deemed as the corrupt bargain from Andrew Jackson and from his followers because reality is Andrew Jackson won both the electoral vote and the popular vote, and he wasn't the president, right? Which, if anyone was doing the same thing, like if any of us were him, we would all be upset. Like we would all be angry. So that's the whole point here. And from this point on, Andrew Jackson makes it his goal to run again and to really paint Washington, D.C., paint all the politicians, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, as corrupt. Right? That's basically his major goal. So let's talk about John Quincy Adams as a president. Now, he has some major points of what he wants to do in his administration. He wants to follow an American system, what Henry Clay had done, but he wants to do a few things. Like, firstly, improve education. He wants to have people to be really have a sense of public education where they will be educated to a certain degree. Obviously, we talked about how in the South that really wasn't as prevalent, or maybe only really until elementary school, and then after that, they went to be farmers. But he wanted to have it on a larger scale. He thought that if people were more educated, it would make democracy a lot more efficient, a lot more better. More people would want to have access to a government job. And that was what the second thing he wanted to do, establish a stronger centralized government by increasing the size of the bureaucracy, right? He wanted to have more explorations out into the West to kind of try to know what was out there, because still at the end of the day, we didn't have a lot of people living out in the West. So he wanted to expand on that, and I already kind of mentioned expand on American system, strengthen the bank, strengthen transportation systems, more manufacturing, all that, the fun stuff. Now, the problem was that when he was president, basically Congress was adamantly against him. The reason why I say this is because a lot of, at this point, there was a good chunk of people in both the House and the Senate that were still for Andrew Jackson. Now, there wasn't enough to pick John Quincy Adams in the House, and that's why he didn't win. But in the Senate, there was more people for Andrew Jackson. So a lot of times, some of his policies were always kind of seen, kind of halted. Right? It was like government slowed down more than it ever had before. There was more division, is really what the better way to say this. Before this, more people were kind of unified on a lot of issues. And because of the election of 1824, they were kind of split on some things, right? Now, John Quincy Adams wanted to push for having more protective tariffs, and this was becoming to be a major issue in the country because in the manufacturing industry, it was great. It helped those trading, helped those creating manufactured goods, but in the South, it was seen as a major issue, right? And the reason why is because a lot of the Southern farmers were really dependent on buying goods from Europeans because they're cheaper in the beginning. But now when you make them more expensive, because that's what protective tariffs did, it forced people to buy American-made goods, and naturally American-made goods became more expensive than even European goods. Farmers were more hurt than anyone else. Obviously, if you're a merchant, you're benefiting because you're selling things for more money. But the Southerners couldn't afford to pay those things, so they were becoming more hurt by these tariffs. And people like Martin Van Buren, who's actually, funny thing is, he's a New York senator, but he was more for Jackson. So they had kind of like a split around, the Senate itself was more against these protective tariffs, even though most of the time you normally see people in the North agreeing with manufacturing. But people were adamantly against doing this for, especially when it comes to farmers trying to pay for goods. So they deem it to be the tariff of abominations. That's what these farmers and those that were adamantly against John Quincy Adams had titled this tariff, and kind of like it was tied to John Quincy Adams forever, was that he had helped pass the tariff of abominations, which obviously by the name itself is pretty horrible, right? And that's really the biggest thing you should understand about this, is that because of this tariff, it really put high taxes on a lot of goods in which farmers really needed. And because of this, throughout all of states that had major farming in them, they became anti-John Quincy Adams, anti-manufacturing, anti-Henry Clay, anti-American system. And this is now leading into, when we start getting closer and closer to the election, right, of 1828, this is now getting momentum to Andrew Jackson. Because at this whole time, Andrew Jackson's sitting there, and he's basically causing more disruption for the government because he's basically pointing out all the problems of these things that John Quincy Adams is doing, including this. Now, John C. Calhoun, who is actually an avid supporter of Andrew Jackson at the time, who is in South Carolina, and this is the famous picture of him. He's not really good at taking pictures, unfortunately. But he is one of the biggest supporters of Andrew Jackson. He is the one pushing these ideas of anti-John Quincy Adams out into the public. And because of all this, it allows for John C. Calhoun to be the VP for Andrew Jackson when they're running again, because now they have gained a lot of support from the South. Now, because of all the suffrage laws that were changed and this division that was going on, the turnout of the election had increased, right? Andrew Jackson, as you know, was already seeking to be reelected. And some of the tactics, and we talked about this last time, was a lot of mudslinging, a lot of going after people's character. And this was the primary reason why Andrew Jackson won. Now, John Quincy Adams wasn't like a horrible president. It wasn't like he did anything that was too outrageous. The tariff, obviously you can have debate on whether it was good or not, but he really didn't do anything wrong in his presidency. But the fact is that for 4 years straight, Andrew Jackson's been painting John Quincy Adams as basically a corrupt individual. And his whole presidency, his whole selection as president was done because of a corrupt bargain. Not because he won, it was because he was placed there, because of nepotism. Right? That was the only reason why. And people believed it. So that's really what causes a lot of people to show up for these elections. So when Jackson runs again, firstly, the candidates are now have shrank, right? And there's only 2 major candidates now. It was no longer 4. And he won by a landslide. Like, dominated. Like, it wasn't even close. 178 electoral votes. He won by 147,000 more people in the popular vote, right? It was easy victory. Now, granted, 56 to 44%. I mean, it's a pretty solid, probably solid win there, right? And you can tell by the electoral map here that even places like in New York, like with Martin Van Buren, they had convinced people in New York to even vote for him, right? So it was an easy victory. And now what he ended up doing was he wanted to change everything about government because he deemed it to be corrupt, right? So now, I kind of mentioned some of this already about who Andrew Jackson is and why people were so closely tied with him, right? the fact is he grew up in Tennessee, which was actually on the outskirts of what North Carolina, South Carolina were, where they cut it away and made it in Tennessee. At the age of 13, he joined the military. Age of 14, he was captured when he was fighting the Revolutionary War by British troops. Refused to shine their boots, so he was scarred by them. Then his mother had actually made an exchange for her to be the prisoner and so he can escape. And then both his parents were killed by the British. So he despised the British with every fiber in his being. And then he ended up making something of himself. He became a war hero, a wealthy planter. So he emphasized himself as being the self-made man, which is basically the concept of you started from nothing and you make something of yourself. It's like the American dream. That's kind of like the best way to look at it, right? And he symbolized being a common person making something big just by pure hard work alone. So when you look at how he won, it was because he pushed these ideas that, granted, they were true. He was just a nobody, and he came out of nowhere and made something of himself. And specifically, in more recent history, became the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, War of 1812, and this all culminated in his massive victory that he had. Now, there's a lot of issues that go with Andrew Jackson, right? There's some, when you look at historians' perspectives, there are people that say there are positives that he did, and there are negatives that he did in his presidency, right? And I give you a list here, which kind of goes exactly into what our mini project's going to be about. That there are 5 major topics of discussion that historians always point to as being the big events that happened in Andrew Jackson's presidency. The spoils system is always something that is mentioned. The Peggy Eaton affair, Indian Removal Act, nullification crisis, and the Battle of the National Bank. Okay, these are the 5 key things you should definitely know because, and I'll tell you, the College Board loves Andrew Jackson. Loves him. As in, they love putting questions on the test on Andrew Jackson. And these 5 things are always mentioned somewhere, whether 3 of them are mentioned in multiple choice and then 2 of them are mentioned in written, or the other way around. They just love putting him on this test all the time. Every time I've seen a test, he's always on it, right? Now, that's why you get mixed messages about him, right? So the funny thing is, when you are going to analyze this, I think most people nowadays always look at him as being the villain, but you could technically make a case for him being good in some ways, right? So let me explain how the mini project works. So I'll jump out of here and I'll show you how it works. All right. Zoom in a little bit here. So basically, you'll be forming, depending on the size of our class, I know that we have generally around like 22 people, I think, total. But there'll be 5 groups, all right? Each group is going to cover a different topic, and I have the topics written down here. Obviously, I already put them on the PowerPoint. The Peggy Eaton affair, the Indian Removal Act, the nullification crisis, the Second Bank of the United States, and the veto, and the spoil system, all right? So each group will be covering one topic, and you're going to be using these articles to help with your research, all right? Basically, in your presentation, you're doing that video presentation like we did last time, right? So you'll use Zoom or Teams. It's up to you. You can have a separate program. That's fine. You're going to cover these 4 major points. First, you're going to first make a thesis. Answer the central question that I posed on the top. Should Andrew Jackson be, as a representative of Jacksonian Democrats, be honored on the $20 bill? Right? Should he be on the $20 bill? And it's something that a lot of people are still debating today, of whether he should be on it or not. I think they made a decision. They think it's going to be Harriet Tubman is going to be, I think, on the $20 bill in I think 2022 or something like that. It's going to start making $20 bills with her on it rather than Andrew Jackson. But that's the question. Should he be the representative on a $20 bill? And a lot of people kind of point to the positives and negatives when they make this debate. So you'll be answering that question, and you'll be creating your thesis with 2 or 3 concrete reasons why, based on your topic that is selected, okay? So you'll first have to have an explanation of what is the topic itself and the characters involved and what you know about it, and try to explain it as thoroughly as you can. So let's just say you have the Indian Removal Act. Right? You need to explain the background of why this happened, what is it, or are there any important characters we should know about this event, all that stuff. Because when you explain it to everybody, they need to be able to know what's going on. I mean, I'm going to talk about it anyway, so anything you may have missed, I'll cover it in the lessons itself. Yeah. So what you should do is probably the best way I would make a PowerPoint, and then when you do your video presentation, you can have you'll have your PowerPoint on the screen while you talk about it. You know what I mean? So it's not like you have to have everything on the screen. You can just have like bullet points, and then you explain it. You know what I mean? So that would be a little easier for you. At least you don't have to like type out an essay like of everything. Just have a bullet point to help you remind yourself of what to say. And then you're gonna in this part C use evidence to support your conclusion, right? So obviously using these articles, they have evidence in there that talk about the events, and you're gonna use that and say, this is, I think he should be on the $20 bill because blah 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 blah, right? So you want to try to use evidence to support your claim, okay? And then lastly, you try to use at least one primary quote from the article that goes exactly with what you're talking about, right? With your evidence. So you at least have these 4 things covered. To help you understand too, everybody will be filling out this graphic organizer on the different events. So as long as you cover these 3 things, you're okay. So this won't be a long one. It'll be like 4 to 5 minutes, very similar to last time. It wasn't long at all. You just need to make sure at least you cover these things. What happened, what stance you're going to take, and the evidence using to prove your point on your stance. All right, so you can be for him being on the 20 or not be on the 20. You just have to explain why, right? So everyone will be filling this out, and obviously at the end, you will be, like you personally will say, what stance would I pick and why, based on everything you learned, okay? That's basically what we're doing for this. So, and I'm giving you until Sunday to post your video. And then Monday, when all the videos are posted already, you'll just do the graphic organizer, okay? So that's what we'll be doing for today, tomorrow, for the weekend, all right? So if you have questions, I put everything in here as best as I possibly can. I even talked about the discussion board and everything. But are there first off any questions on this? We're okay? So what you should do, obviously you can text people that are home right now. Hopefully they're awake. They should be awake, I would think. Try to talk with some people, find out what groups you want to make, and then what topic you're going to pick. I actually opened up a discussion question in Schoology I'll show you, that says group selection, Andrew Jackson project. So I put the base information and the different topics here with the articles attached. So you're going to put all the groups, all the names of the group members, and which topic you're picking in this discussion. So at least we can kind of know, because we cannot have 2 of the same group. Everyone has to do their own group. Topic, I mean. All right? Yeah, you can do Zoom or you can do Teams. It's all up to you.